De van oorsprong Cypriotische bijbelwetenschapper Myrto Theocharous kun je gerust een geleerde noemen. Op dit moment doet ze onderzoek naar het Bijbelboek Deuteronomium. Als theoloog mengt ze zich voortdurend in het publieke debat en schrijft blogs en artikelen. Ze steekt ook praktisch haar handen uit de mouwen. Myrto zet zich in voor slachtoffers van mensenhandel. Om de liefde te leren, zegt ze zelf. Vandaag leert ze ons iets over het thema Love does not envy.
It was a long night. I had just gotten back from the red light district. I took the train and the bus and I got home to my warm, clean bed. And then as I was lying there, it hit me. It could have been me. It could have been me back there in the red light district in that wrecked house where customers speed and pee on the floor. It could have been me in that filthy house where the blankets have welcomed hundreds and hundreds of sweaty men, where the windows have never opened to let some sun come in and some air to clean the stench out of there. It could have been me terrified that someone that I know would walk into the brothel and recognize me and tell my family what I've been doing for a living. It could have been me worried that now that I'm going into this bedroom with this man, he's going to hurt me, he's going to spit on me, he's going to curse me, he's going to force himself on me to serve him. It could have been me, but instead, I'm home in my nice, cozy, clean bed. But God is not. God is back there. Wherever his people are violated, he himself is violated. God too is kidnapped and trafficked. God too is violated. God too is eyed and subject to the male gaze, and God too is groped. And nowhere else do we see this identification of God and the people and the abused people, but in a place that you would never think about, in the Ark of the Covenant. Let's go back to the Old Testament in this sacred place called Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant is located. And there's something really wrong in that place. The women who are at the tent of meeting are being sexually violated by the priesthood there. And God is not identified with the priesthood as one would have expected, but God is identified with these violated women. And he's going to show us through his ark that he too is kidnapped, he too is violated, he too is eyed, and he too is groped. So, the first story, the ark is kidnapped. If we go to the Old Testament and to the time that the Israelites were fighting the Philistines, we will see that the Israelites decide to take the Ark of the Covenant, to kidnap it, and bring it into their work camp because they want to force the hand of God to help them fight and have victory over the Philistines. So what they do is they don't consult God, they don't ask him what the reason is that they're being defeated. They just take the ark and they bring it into their camp. And of course, the Ark of the Covenant is not manipulated, it's not coerced, and the Ark is teaching us that the sacred is not coerced. You know, all this reverence and meticulous care that God was requiring from his people for his temple and for his sacred objects and for his ark were actually always meant to be about his people. all these boring instructions that we read in Leviticus about the purity laws and the cleanliness laws, they always had a purpose to teach us on how to treat his sacred images, his sacred people. When his people are wronged, it was the mercy seat, that golden cover over the ark, that was contaminated. That whatever happens to his people, it was the ark that was affected. So this is what the ark wants to teach us, that it is us, that it represents us. So the ark is trafficked, and it will not be coerced by the Philistines, by the Israelites, I'm sorry. The ark will not give them victory, but it will bring the judgment on them, and the Philistines will be the ones to win this battle. So the ark now changes hands from her traffickers, the Israelites, to her Philistine traffickers, who now treat her as a trophy. So they take the ark and they lock her up in a house in the temple of Dagon, their god. They treat the ark as if it's an inanimate object, not a living subject, as if it's a piece of furniture. But of course, their own God is a piece of furniture because he falls on the floor and he's dismembered. But it was a fatal flaw for the Philistines to think that the ark of the living God is a piece of furniture. It's more than a box. So God is angry. The judgment of God comes on them. And they realize that the ark is dangerous. The sacred is dangerous. One night I met Sandy at the red light district. She was sitting outside a bar eating fries, and we were talking. And Sandy is a girl who was sexually abused by her father for years. And when she told her mother, she didn't believe her and threw her out of the house. And then she met her man, who also abused her and trafficked her. And Sandy was angry. She was angry at her life. She was angry at her abusers. And she was angry at God. And of course, we as Christians feel uncomfortable with anger. But at the end of our discussion, she told me, you know, Myrto, this is my survival. It's this anger that keeps me alive. And I realized that her anger was her only connection to her sanctity, because her anger is a reflection, it's an indication that something sacred has been violated. And the ark is teaching us that anger is actually the most appropriate reaction to the violation of the sacred. So God too is angry. The Philistines realize that they're holding the living God, so they allow now the ark to be freed and go back to Israelite territory. But we will soon find out that Israelite territory that was supposed to be a safe place for the ark, we will discover that she will be violated there as well. The text tells us that the ark strikes the Israelites in Beth Shemesh, where she goes, because they looked into her. But this is not just a typical looking. They don't just see the ark coming from a distance and just look at her like that. This is a different kind of looking. It's an inappropriate eyeing, looking into her innermost parts. It's a violation of her freedom of self-disclosure. And what is happening here, if we go back to the book of Numbers, we learn that the ark never wanted to be outside in public naked. It required that it was covered when it was outside the ark, the tent of meeting. So was the ark naked as it was approaching them from the Philistine territory? And what would have been the proper reaction of the Israelites if the ark was in fact uncovered? Well, there's another story in Scripture that can help us. If we go back to Genesis, we remember the story where Ham looks at his father Noah, who is naked, and he's cursed. What's the appropriate behavior there? Well, the brothers show us that they walk backwards holding a piece of clothing and they cover their father's nakedness so that he won't be degraded in their eyes. They protect his dignity. And perhaps the Israelites should have done the same as they watched the ark approach them where she was violated and kidnapped in the Philistine territory, approaching them naked. They could have covered her, but instead they choose to satisfy their hungry gaze on her. This reminds me of the most shocking experience the volunteers who enter the anti-trafficking ministry have. When we enter the brothels, we are really shocked at the lobby where all the customers are sitting. And the pimp calls out the girl to come out from her bedroom into the lobby. And he asks her to take off her clothes so that the customers will take a good look at her, size her up. And the pimp is reciting the menu. He's basically reciting the list of all the services that this girl can offer with the corresponding prices. And if the customer likes what he sees, he sizes up the merchandise and decides that he wants to buy for this price, then the transaction is sealed. Perhaps also the ark is going through a similar violation. She is denied the freedom of self-disclosure. So God too is angry because of this. Before we go to the next one, we feel very uncomfortable with anger, with God's wrath. But what is God's wrath? God's wrath is a reflection of the violations of his people. We have a saying in Greece that says, the cry of the people is God's wrath. One is a reflection of the other. Actually, if you think of stories of judgment in the Old Testament, they start with the cry of the people rising up to the ears of God, and then God responds with his judgment. It's a response of God to the justice violations that happen on earth. This is God's wrath. So God too is angry. After 20 years, David decides to take the ark to Jerusalem. But the objectification of the ark comes to the surface there as well. It surfaces in the incident where Uzzah reaches out his hand and grabs the ark so that to prevent it from falling. And we would normally say that's a good act. He's protecting the ark from crashing down on the floor. But he's struck dead. And the text says this is an inappropriate act. It's a blasphemous act. Why is that so bad? Because Uzzah's act actually presupposes that the ark is an inanimate, passive, defenseless, powerless object. It presupposes that the ark is just a piece of furniture, like Dagon, that can crash on the floor. So this unsolicited familiarity that Uzzah portrays was a violation of the ark. It was treating it as an object rather than a subject. So the ark wants to teach us, and I hope that it has taught us, that it's living our story and is fully identified with us. I hope that the ark has invited us to feel the weight and the seriousness of the darkness that can enclose us when the sacred is violated, when sacred bodies are violated. I hope the ark has invited us to get a little bit more angry when his sacred images are violated, to get a bit more intolerant with these violations and more passionate about protecting his sacred images. The ark has shown us that it's more than a box. It's not just a box, it's not just an object. And through that, I hope that it showed us that bodies are not just bodies, They are more than bodies. They're sacred bodies. And you know, this is a very important lesson to learn because our life and our salvation depends on it. It is our ability to look at a humiliated, beaten, naked body of a Middle Eastern man on a cross and see the God of the universe there that saves us. And if we are able to see in this naked, beaten body of a crucified man, the God of the universe, then we can no longer look at any body as just a body. We only see the sacred. Our eyes are changed forever. So how does the church serve the sacred images of God? First of all, before it does anything, the church needs to sit in silence and attentiveness before the sacred. Do not try to put words in the mouth of the violated, of the abused. Do not try to interpret their experiences for them. Do not try to make decisions for them that you think is for their own good, or relocate them to places that you think is best for them. No, the church should sit in silence and attentiveness before the sacred. If we are standing before the sacred bodies, we should sit below them until we are invited to come into their story, until we're initiated by them to enter their journey of pain, until we are welcomed into their memories. Because God too entered our world and he was fully acquainted with our grief before leading us to life. Thank you very much.